Hello, everyone. Today is an interesting day because we are going to talk about dogs. Now, I personally love dogs, and I found a TikToker that also loves dogs and loves talking about dog fat phobia, which is something I don't know much about. So let's watch together and learn.
It's time for our quarterly fatphobic dog comment. I know I'm not going to change this person's opinion. They're going to be a jerk, and that's their prerogative. But for those of you who are curious about this and want to learn more, let's talk about it. When I talk about fat phobia in the dog community, a lot of people have such a poor and biased understanding of what fat phobia is that they assume that what I mean is they think that fat phobia is getting your feelings hurt, as if them saying that your dog is fat is going to hurt your dog's feelings. But of course, that's not what I'm talking about. Obviously, our dogs don't speak enough English or understand the concept of fat phobia to care if someone calls them fat. But their owners do. This culture of fat phobia exists everywhere we go. It's why some dog owners feel pressured to buying expensive diet dog foods and low-calorie treats. It can even change the way people choose to train their dogs. Rather than going with a method that's right for them, some people feel pressured to choose training methods that don't involve treats because they are so concerned with the possibility that their dog might become fat. And it can even show up in the medical care we receive for our dogs. Veterinarians are not exempt from living in a fat-phobic culture, and that does affect their decision-making. Now, obviously, no dogs were bred to be fat, but also genetics do impact weight, body type, body size, muscle tone, etc. Backyard breeders tend to not pay attention to the genetics of their dogs. This is going to impact how they gain weight. And don't forget that 99% of the dogs in humane societies and shelters are going to be coming from backyard breeders, which means their genetics are likely going to be poor. There are so many factors that could affect a dog's weight or their ability to lose weight. And yet, so many people feel qualified to shame dog owners for having a fat dog without knowing anything about the why. And that feeling of entitlement to shame owners for having a fat dog is fat phobia. Because weight does not equal health. Weight is not the sole or best predictor of a dog's health. There are skinny dogs that are very unhealthy, and there are fat dogs that are doing just fine. No one is saying that health is not important or that we can't have conversations about weight. But y'all's insistence that you should be entitled to shame people for the weight of their dog proves my point. Fat phobia exists in the dog community. And if you're still not sure, I got a whole playlist for you.
Proper order. So I think she's saying that mutts and other dogs that don't come from fancy breeders are more prone to being fat because breeders tend to breed out the fat genes in the dogs. And I have no doubt that there are actually some obesity genes that are bred out of certain dogs from certain breeders. But having those genes in dogs from backyard breeders and mutts and other street dogs is definitely not why dog obesity is so prevalent. And there's also no evidence that dogs from humane societies are on average fatter than dogs from high-end breeders. And she also said that dogs that come from backyard breeders are going to have poorer genetics. I have so much to say about that. Mostly that that's not really true. Breeders that focus on genetics might breed out some unhealthy genes, but a lot of them also keep unhealthy genes by trying to keep purebred dogs pure or trying to keep interesting looking dog features that people find cute but aren't necessarily healthy for the dog. Like dachshunds, also known as wiener dogs, are often bred to be as long as possible because people think that's cute, but having a very long torso can often cause spinal issues amongst other issues for those dogs. And that's just one example. But there are a lot of breeders that only focus on genetics purely for the looks of the dog and not necessarily for the long-term health of the breeds that they're breeding. And besides that, There's no evidence that dogs from high-end breeders have overall less health issues than the dogs from humane societies that she claims have poorer genetics. And that claim is also just really weird. She's basically saying that dogs from the pound haven't had their undesirable genes bred out of them yet, including the fat genes. And at the end, she said that what she means by dog fat phobia is shaming owners for having fat dogs. But the comment she's responding to didn't say anything about shaming owners for having fat dogs. It just said, stop saying no dogs were bred to be fat and there's no such thing as dog fat phobia. That commenter wasn't shaming owners or being fat phobic towards dogs. It was just a statement that pet obesity is unhealthy, which is true. But anyway, let's get into more of this dog fat phobia playlist because it is great.
This is what we call pathologizing fatness. Being fat does not automatically mean that you are going to have health concerns, and I fucking hate when people retool fat-phobic rhetoric like this to try to apply it to dogs. Plenty of fat dogs don't have joint issues.
Yes, but plenty of them do. And the fat dogs are way more likely to have joint issues, which was the point of the comment. If you didn't read the comment, it says, I know that, and lung cancer doesn't only occur in smokers, but if you don't want it, not smoking is still a good idea to try to prevent it. Yeah, that's true. That argument makes perfect sense in response to her claim that obesity doesn't cause joint issues in dogs. Because not all dogs with joint issues are obese, but dogs that are obese are definitely more likely to have joint issues than the non-obese dogs.
But there is an activity that dogs regularly do that has a high likelihood of increasing your dog's susceptibility for joint issues, arthritis, and needing knee surgery. It's called agility. You might have heard of it. It's a pretty common sport, but funnily enough, people don't say that the dogs who do agility are unhealthy. I wonder why that is. You can care about your dog's health and your dog's weight without being fat phobic. We can and should keep track of our dog's weight so that we notice changes that might signal that something's wrong for our dog. We can and should care about our dog's nutrition and meeting their exercise needs. But guess what? We can do all of those things without being fat phobic or pathologizing being fat. You've been my follower for a while, so I'm going to give you a second chance. I'm going to say I need you to take a break from my content, and if you have enjoyed listening and learning and exploring dogs with me at all, then I need you to consider why what you said made me so mad. I need you to consider your own biases and do some work to unpack that shit. Because just because we're talking about dogs does not give you an excuse to be fat phobic. And if you can't talk about health and wellness for dogs without utilizing fat phobic rhetoric, then you need to stop talking about health and wellness for dogs.
I've never seen someone so upset over someone saying that dogs being fat is unhealthy. She said that the commenter should consider why what they said was so upsetting to her, but I don't have a good reason why a commenter saying that engaging in behaviors to prevent disease, like not smoking or maintaining healthy body weight, is so deeply upsetting to her. The only thing I can think of is that to her, any mention of obesity being unhealthy is deeply upsetting to her, which is not the commenter's problem. In dogs and in humans, obesity is a risk factor for disease. And saying that isn't the commenter being fat phobic, it's just true. And also, in the last video, she said that she doesn't deny that there is some correlation between weight and health issues with dogs, and she's open to having a discussion about it, but she just doesn't want pet owners being shamed for having fat pets. Okay. But then this person makes a perfectly reasonable comment talking about the increased risks of certain diseases when it comes to dog obesity, but she flipped out and called this person fat phobic for even mentioning the increased risk in disease because of dog obesity. It really doesn't seem like she's open to having that discussion about weight and dogs and health. And she also mentioned agility, which are those dog competitions where dogs run around through obstacle courses, and it's a lot of jumping and exercising for the dogs. And I don't know if it's true that some dogs have poorer health because of doing agility, But if they do, this is the same argument as when people say that exercising isn't necessarily healthy because bodybuilders exercise more than almost anyone, and they often have a lot of negative health outcomes in the long term because of their lifestyle. But in both cases, with bodybuilders and dogs doing agility, you're taking a very small subsection of people who exercise regularly and go to extremes and trying to use them as an example of why exercising is unhealthy, while ignoring the majority of people who do exercise regularly that are on average healthier than the people that don't exercise at all. And the same with dogs. Most dogs aren't doing agility, and most dogs that do exercise regularly are healthier than the dogs that don't do any exercise. It's weird to use agility competitions or bodybuilders or any other extreme to try to make your point that exercise isn't as healthy as people think it is. And she also told the commenter to unpack their fat phobia because we can discuss dog health without being fat phobic. But in the last video, she outright said that dogs with fat genes have poorer genetics because they have worse health than dogs without the fat genes. How is that any less fat phobic than what this commenter said?
We're getting better at recognizing that weight is far more complicated when it comes to humans, but we're still not great at recognizing that weight is more complicated when we're talking about dogs. For instance, genetics plays a huge role in metabolism, in how a body gains weight and how a body loses weight. I cannot take responsibility for my dog's genetics, especially if I'm not the breeder. I'm also not responsible or in control of all of the aspects of my dog's health. If my dog is injured or on a medication that's causing them to gain weight, I'm not in control of that. And on a more basic level, these comments assume that everyone has the same access to education and resources when it comes to health issues, which we know is not true. But placing the blame on individuals rather than systems sure is easier.
So if anyone has any doubt that fat logic is infecting pet care and pet obesity, we now have confirmation that it absolutely is. Genetics and medication are now becoming the excuse people have for having obese pets. And there was a part at the end when she said that we should blame systems rather than individuals. That statement is ridiculous for multiple reasons. One, she is in some way acknowledging that obesity in pets is a problem by saying lack of knowledge around it is a systemic issue, which goes against her previous video where she said that someone is fat phobic for saying that obesity leads to a higher risk of disease in pets. So how can pet health, specifically when it comes to obesity, be a problem that people are systemically ill-informed about, but also acknowledging those risks of obesity in pets is fat phobic? Those are two completely opposite beliefs, but she claims to believe both. And two, she says she's a pet trainer, which means if there is a systemic lack of knowledge around obesity, she should be one of the people helping educate on the risks of pet obesity and helping fix the systemic issue. If you want to claim that pet obesity is a systemic issue because people aren't educated on the subject, but you as a dog trainer don't use your platform to provide that knowledge, then you are contributing to the systemic issue. So instead of educating people on the risks of pet obesity on her page, she's making multiple videos calling people fat phobic for suggesting that dog obesity is bad.
What I have said and will continue to say is that a dog's weight is not the sole or best indicator of their health. That we should view weight through a morally neutral lens, neither good nor bad. And we should not shame or blame any dog owners for having a fat dog. Now, you mentioned that for your dog, in order to maintain them at the weight that you wanted to, all you had to do was decrease their calories. And I'm so glad that that worked for you. That does not work for everyone. Not every dog is physically capable of maintaining a thin body.
She said that dog owners shouldn't be shamed or blamed for having a fat dog. I don't think they need to be shamed, but blamed, definitely. Who else is to blame for what their dog eats? And apparently we've gotten to the point where obesity is now part of dogs' genetics. and that some dogs can never maintain a thin body. If there are specific genes that prevent a dog from losing weight, even if you give them less food, what are they? And she also said that weight isn't the best indicator of a dog's health. Not that weight isn't a factor in a dog's health, which seems like she knows that weight does have some effect on dogs' health. But she still made that entire video before talking about how pathologizing fatness is fatphobic. So does weight have some effect on pet health or none at all? And on top of all of that, this comment mentioned what I said previously, that if she does have all of this background knowledge about dog health and she doesn't use it to educate people on the negative effects of dog obesity, then all she's doing is normalizing dog obesity. If she knows that having a fat dog leads to increased health issues, and all she does on her channel is make excuses as to why pet obesity is okay, like some dogs can't maintain a thin body, and it's fatphobic to pathologize obesity, and not everyone has knowledge about pet health, then she is contributing to the pet obesity problem by justifying why it's okay for dogs to be fat.
And this is not a hate to you. I was just hoping somebody would, so thank you. Do you judge parents negatively because they have a fat toddler? According to your logic, you should. Toddlers are entirely dependent on us. We have an immense amount of control over their bodies and how much food they get. Is it okay to judge a parent based around the fact that they have a fat toddler? If you say yes, that it's okay to judge a parent based on their kid's weight, you and I are just flat out in disagreement. If you say no, it's not okay to judge someone's parenting ability based on their kid's weight, then I need you to tell me the difference. Weight is not an indicator of overall health, and we can have conversations about weight and health without shaming each other.
I don't think the parents of fat toddlers should be shamed, but they should be informed of the risks of having an obese child. And if they don't take steps to fix it, then yes, they should be judged. Just like if a dog parent knows about the risks of dog obesity and lets their dog get really fat, then yeah, I would judge them for reducing their pet's quality of life. And as she said in this TikTok, toddlers and pets are completely dependent on their caretakers, and it's the responsibility of those caretakers to keep their pet or child healthy. If they don't do that, then that's a problem. And she asked the question, is it okay to judge a parent based on their child's body size? If you let your child get really obese, then I do think your parenting skills should be judged. Because it doesn't take a doctor or a medical professional to see how being very obese can ruin a child or pet's quality of life. For example, when I was a young teen, I went to San Antonio, Texas. And if you don't know anything about San Antonio, it was for a long time known as the fattest city in the United States. And from my experience, it definitely lived up to that title. But while I was there, I saw this little girl in a convenience store, and she couldn't have been more than 3 years old, and she was the fattest child I've ever seen. She was a normal height for a 3-year-old, but she must have weighed at least 75 pounds. At least. Probably closer to 80 or 90. At about 3 feet tall. And my first thought when I saw her was that she looked like a little sumo baby. And she could also barely walk and was completely round. You know how people are supposed to be taller than they are wide? This little girl was one giant circle, as wide as she was tall. And when she walked, she waddled. It was honestly one of the most grotesque things I've ever seen. And I remember thinking how a parent lets their 3-year-old child get to that size. I was probably 14 or 15 years old at the time, and I knew that was not right, and those parents had messed up. So to answer her question, is it okay to judge parents based on their child's body size? At the extremes, yes. If you let your child get to 80 pounds at 3 years old, or you let your 10-year-old get to 200 pounds, then yes, Your parenting abilities should be called into question. And it's no different than if a toddler was consistently very underweight. Like if that same 3-year-old was 15 pounds, I think that would be a massive problem. I don't think people should throw tomatoes at parents with really fat kids or anything like that. But I do think that if you let your child waste away at a really low weight, or you continuously let them gain weight to dangerous levels, then you have neglected your child's health, and I think your parenting skills should absolutely be called into question. So overall, parents and pet owners do have a responsibility to keep their child and their pet reasonably healthy, and that does include keeping them at a reasonably healthy weight. It seems like this woman has taken fat logic and grafted it onto pets and created pet fat logic, and it is just as nonsensical and confusing as human fat logic. Hello, this is me in post-editing. I was going to end the video here, but I realized I made a huge mistake, and that was not focusing on the visuals explaining what dog fat phobia was in the first TikTok. So let's go over that now. So we have this shot here, which has a dog owner holding a dog, and there's a thought bubble of them thinking a bunch of stuff about fat phobia, I think. The thought bubble says, thin is better, diet culture, discrimination, body shame. And this is all talking about dog fat phobia, but I thought she said that dog fat phobia wasn't shaming dogs for their bodies, it was shaming owners for having fat dogs. But then she says body shame here. So are the dogs actually getting body shamed? Or is this the human thinking about body shame and projecting human fat phobia onto the dog, which would be fat shaming the dog? I don't know. And then it also says diet culture, which I assume now means doggy diet culture, which is apparently something we have to worry about now. And thin is better. Yes, for dogs, having a thinner dog is usually better than having a fat dog. Absolutely. And then there's a person next to the dog owner saying, your dog is fat. I love this screenshot. In context and out of context, it's fantastic. I just imagine there are a bunch of people walking down the streets just acknowledging that dogs are fat to owners and then walking away. Happens all the time. And then there's this screenshot, which has the same owner and dog and thought bubble. But then there's this angry person with another word bubble that I can't read. All it says is no something something training. I don't know what that means. But then there's this thing kind of hanging from the top of the image, and I have no clue what it is. My first thought is a wrecking ball, but I don't think it's a wrecking ball. But I also don't know what else it is. If someone knows what this thing is, please explain to me. And then there's this final screenshot that has a dog in the middle, and then what I assume is all the reasons a dog can be fat that aren't just food and exercise. And it says things like age, behavior issues, owner's mental health, location, feeding style, owner disability. This can't be real. What does someone's location have to do with how fat their dog is? An owner disability? If someone is disabled and they can't exercise their dog as much because of it, they can either give the dog to someone else that can walk the dog more and give it more exercise, or more likely, just feed the dog less. You don't have to let your dog get fat because you have a disability. And it also says nutritional content, I assume of the food you're feeding the dog. If the food you're giving your dog has low nutritional content, then give them better food. That's also something you as an owner have 100% control over. This whiteboard image is so ridiculous that I have to believe it's a joke. I have to believe that everything said in all of these TikToks was made ironically, because I can't believe anyone would actually draw all of this out to explain why it's okay for dogs to be fat. For my own sanity, I have to believe that all of this is a joke. We could not have sunk this low that people are making images like this. It's not possible. Okay, that is the actual end of the video. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm curious what you guys have to say about it, and I will see you in the next video.